Released the names of the 4 officers killed in the Eastern Freeway crash in Melbourne. 2 were trainees. The Big 4 banks promised to help businesses make ends meet before the start of the JobKeeper scheme.
Go to your bank, ring their hotline, ask for that support, and that support will be forthcoming.
The Ruby Princess soon to set sail from Port Kembla as dozens of crew fly out of Sydney. And teachers and parents thinking outside the box to keep children educated and entertained during the pandemic. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Kirsten Aiken. The 4 Victorian police officers killed in a roadside crash yesterday have been identified, as well as the driver of a Porsche who was pulled over at the time of the incident. Elias Kluwer joins us from Melbourne now. Elias, who were the officers struck yesterday?
Yeah, good afternoon, Kirsten. As you said, Victoria Police just releasing the names of the officers who were tragically killed yesterday. They are Leading Senior Constable Lynette Taylor, Constable Glenn Humphreys, Senior Constable Kevin King and Constable Josh Preston. He had only recently graduated from the police academy, a young man who is set to dedicate the rest of his life serving and protecting the Victorian community. Today, the Chief Commissioner paid tribute to those 4 officers and paid his respects to the families of the officers and says the force is still reeling from this and will be for several days.
What information has been released about the Porsche driver?
Yeah, so we now know his name and that it's 41-year-old Richard Pusey, who's a well-known mortgage broker here in Melbourne. He was, of course, allegedly speeding along the Eastern Freeway when he was pulled over by 2 officers. Now, once in the emergency lane, he was tested for drugs. It's alleged he tested positive, and then 2 other officers then joined Mr. Pusey and the other officers to impound his car. At about 5:40, it's believed the truck crushed into one of the squad cars and the Porsche, killing all 4 officers. It's at that point it's believed Mr. Pusey extraordinarily took pictures of the gruesome incident and then fled the scene, later posting those pictures on Facebook. Today, the Chief Commissioner, Graham Ashton, said he was disgusted by those acts. Now, Mr. Pusey is in police custody and he's yet to be charged. Elias Kluwer in Melbourne. It's been another good day so far in Australia's fight against the coronavirus. Western Australia has had a second straight day of no new infections. There was 1 new death in Victoria. Here is what else is happening today. Hundreds of thousands of people have been granted early access to superannuation as big banks agree to special measures aimed at helping businesses pay staff. The Ruby Princess will leave Australia in the next few hours, 5 weeks after it was allowed to dock in Sydney with coronavirus-infected passengers. The Australian government is pushing for international experts to scrutinise wildlife markets similar to the one COVID-19 is suspected to have originated in. Residents in the United Kingdom have been warned that physical distancing measures will most likely be necessary for the rest of the year. And a surge in infections amongst migrant workers has seen Singapore's total cases rise to more than 10,000. That's the most in the Southeast Asian region. Well, the Big 4 banks have promised to provide more help to businesses struggling to make ends meet ahead of the start of the federal government's JobKeeper scheme. The government has also revealed how many people have asked for early access to their superannuation because of the pandemic. Political reporter Jade McMillan takes us through the detail.
Well, the Prime Minister and the Treasurer have provided an update on some of the economic measures that the government has put in place in response to coronavirus. They have revealed that the Tax Office has approved more than 450,000 applications for early access to superannuation, totalling $3.8 billion. This is the measure allowing people to get access to up to $10,000 of their super this financial year and $10,000 next financial year if they're struggling struggling through this pandemic. The Prime Minister and Treasurer also revealing that those $750 cash payments that were announced as part of the first economic stimulus package, that they have now been paid to 6.8 million people. And when it comes to the government's JobKeeper wage subsidy program, that $1,500 a fortnight subsidy that will be paid to eligible businesses, they said that 275,000 businesses have applied since formal applications opened. They say that a large number of those businesses are sole traders. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, though, said that he is aware that some business owners are struggling to get the finance that they need to keep paying their staff until the JobKeeper subsidy kicks in the first week of May. And the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, revealed that he's held a phone hookup with the CEOs of the Big Four banks and the ATO Commissioner. He says that the banks have agreed to set up phone hotlines to make it easier for those business owners to get in touch, and that they've also promised to speed up the processing of their claims.
So our message today is, if you are a business or a not-for-profit operation that is eligible for the JobKeeper payment, as required, you need to pay your staff ahead of receiving the money from the tax office. Go to your bank, ring their hotline, ask for that support, and that support will be forthcoming.
And Jade, the Chief Medical Officer, Brendan Murphy, has appeared before a parliamentary committee today.
That's right. You'd remember last week the Prime Minister announced that if Australia continued making good progress in terms of the number of coronavirus cases here, that National Cabinet would look at easing some of the restrictions that have been put in place. He gave the country a 4-week time period on that. We're about 1 week into that at the moment. And Brendan Murphy told a Senate committee today that there is more work to be done, but he was quizzed on which restrictions might be eased if we stay on the good path that Australia is on so far. And he hinted that it might involve easing some of the social distancing restrictions and perhaps allowing people to gather again in small groups.
We certainly would not be contemplating large-scale gatherings, but certainly some relaxation of the size of small groups is possible. There are a range of measures that they've asked us to consider, things like community sport, some retail measures. All of those things will be in the mix, but we have to weigh up the public health risk versus the benefit to society and the economy.
Chief Medical Officer Brendan Murphy there. Now, while we might see some of the social distancing restrictions eased, Professor Murphy has said, or has warned not to expect an easing of Australia's travel restrictions anytime soon. He says that Australia's effective border closure has been very effective in helping to contain the number of coronavirus cases in the country. He says he can't see any major changes being made to those arrangements in the next 3 to 4 months.
That's Jade McMillan in Canberra. Final preparations are taking place on board the Ruby Princess as the cruise ship prepares to depart Australian waters today. Hundreds of crew members have disembarked the ship and boarded buses to Sydney Airport. Our reporter Mark Reddy joins us now from Port Kembla. Mark, the big question, when is the ship leaving?
Well, Kirsten, that is a very good question. So far, we've been told that the ship will leave at 4 o'clock, but so far there have been countless delays over the past week. You will remember that the Police Commissioner originally said that this ship would leave on Sunday. It is now Thursday. What we know this afternoon is that ambulances have just gone into the port and they're attending to 11 infected crew. It's expected they will be brought away and taken to hospitals. It's also, we understand that their symptoms are mild though, so not overly serious. But what we also know is that 21 infected crew members yesterday were put into hotels, quarantined hotels for 14 days. This morning it was an early morning scramble for hundreds of Filipino crew to get onto buses. They have been asking for weeks to get off the Ruby Princess, and today that wish was granted. They had their medical checks done. They had to show their flight itineraries in order for them to pass New South Wales Police. Socially distanced on buses, 15 to each bus, around 40 buses made their way north to Sydney Airport, where the crew disembarked, and they were provided consular assistance by the Philippine Consul General, Ezadine Targo, and then of course they are in the process of checking in. Their flight is expected to leave at 6 p.m. tonight.
Mark, what has Princess Cruises had to say about the expected departure of the Ruby Princess?
Yeah, well, Kirsten, Princess Cruises has really been quite tight-lipped this whole disaster, if you like. Basically, they have released a statement this afternoon in which they say, thank you to the crew of the Ruby Princess and the local community who never lost sight of the fact that this was about people caught up in difficult circumstances, not of their making. So that was from the CEO, Jan Swartz. Now, we have asked repeatedly for interviews with her, but those requests have been denied right up until now. What we also know is that the company has donated $50,000 to a local charity that was delivering care packages to crew while they were on board. We understand that at least 500 people will be setting sail on this cruise when it leaves Port Kembla and makes its way to Manila. From there, we understand that the crew will have to quarantine again for probably 14 days before they are either allowed to go home or they are able to catch flights out of Manila.
That is Mark Reddy keeping us updated on the expected departure of the Ruby Princess. We're taking you live now to Perth, where Western Australian Premier Mark McGowan is speaking about the state's second straight day of zero new coronavirus cases.
Commercial landlords must provide rent relief that equates to a minimum of 3 months' rent and frees outgoing to small businesses that have suffered at least a 30% reduction in turnover due to COVID-19. Grants will be equivalent to 25% of the landlord's land tax bill for 1920. The commercial rent relief grants will be administered through the Small Business Development Corporation, with applications opening on May 1. For more information, please visit the website. In addition to this, we've allocated $30 million for grants of up to $2,000 for residential tenants who have lost their job or are facing financial hardship due to COVID-19. This assistance will help to keep tenants going. Helping eligible tenants continue to pay rent will reduce the risk of exposing landlords to financial hardship in meeting their mortgage obligations. Under this scheme, up to $2,000 will be paid directly to the tenant's landlord to contribute to the tenant's rental payments where they are in difficulty. This will be administered through the Department of Mines, Industry, Regulation and Safety, with applications opening from May 1. Again, more information will be available on their website. This is a targeted scheme to provide help to both tenants and landlords of commercial and residential properties. Ideally, this is about looking after small businesses, looking after vulnerable residential tenants, and looking after mum and dad investors whose lives have been turned upside down due to COVID-19. It's the right thing to do, and it's consistent with what has occurred, in some ways more generous than what has occurred in other states. So it is $130 million towards commercial and residential tenancies. Now, in addition to that, the state government's commitment to the West Australian training system is there, and we want to increase and continue training opportunities. As a result, the Building and Construction Industry Training Fund was boosted in 2018 by extending it to the mining industry. I'd like to acknowledge the new chair of the board here today, Reg Howard-Smith, for his work since being appointed to that role. Today we can announce a $24.5 million support package to assist the building and construction industry to maintain a skilled workforce during the COVID-19 crisis. This is all about supporting WA's small businesses and supporting our apprentices and trainees. We need our apprentices and trainees to continue to be skilled up for the future, because we will get through this, we will get past COVID-19, and we want young West Australians working on future West Australian projects. The package includes $10 million to provide an immediate one-off payment of $2,000 to employers of existing apprentices and trainees currently receiving Construction Training Fund grant payments. This is a direct cash boost for those businesses. In addition, a new grant scheme worth $9.5 million will be introduced to assist employers to retain their existing apprentices, with payments backdated from April 1. These payments will range from $250 per month to $500 per month per apprentice or trainee, depending on the trades facing the most critical skill shortages in the industry. We must retain our skilled workforce, especially in building and construction. This will make sure jobs are maintained and our construction workforce is ready to assist with post-COVID-19 economic recovery. This is about plumbers, bricklayers, electricians and the like. This will be part of our economic recovery. In addition, if you're an apprentice in the construction industry looking to upskill, you can now claim back up to $1,000 when you undertake a new short course. The building and construction sectors are an essential service to the West Australian economy and community. I'll now hand over to Treasurer Ben White, to the Minister for Education, Sue Ellery, to further update you on the measures we've taken on building and construction. But once again, I'd like to thank Reg Howard-Smith and the BC ITF Board for their assistance here.
Thanks very much, Premier. Can I start my comments by acknowledging...
We're interrupting that press conference to take you to another. The Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Nick Coatsworth, is speaking.
61 confirmed cases of coronavirus COVID-19. We've had continued to have a low number over the past 24 hours of only 12 new cases diagnosed. Tragically, 75 lives of Australians have been lost to coronavirus disease. We have performed 458,000 tests since the epidemic started in Australia. In terms of our current capacity to treat patients in need of critical care, we have 48 patients in intensive care units around Australia, and 30 of those are on ventilators, helping them breathe, and certainly that is a very challenging time for their friends and family, so we certainly acknowledge that today. I'd like to just reflect on a conversation I had today with all of the many of the surgical subspecialty heads in association and collaboration with the President of the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons, Mr Tony Sparnan. And that conversation was had in light of the recent government announcement to lift some of the restrictions on elective surgery. And I just wanted to pay tribute to that group in particular for their collaborative approach across all the sectors that they deal with, but approach that has fundamentally been about the welfare of their patients and restoring care in a safe and equitable way in this very challenging environment that we face ourselves in, looking to demonstrate to the public that our hospitals are safe places again for elective surgery. So I'd like to thank the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons in particular, along with our anaesthetists and our operative nurses and the other peak groups that I've had the privilege of being able to discuss this really important policy change over the coming weeks. I'd like to thank patients and families as well who have been waiting for elective surgery for their patients. We will be moving together slowly and cautiously over the next month to look at the impact on our health system capacity of reintroducing some level of elective surgery procedures. And we're going to be monitoring the impact of that. And one of the ways we're going to be monitoring that has been announced today by the Health Minister in a joint press release with myself. We have, and National Cabinet has agreed that we require a real-time information system that we can monitor intensive care beds across the country. This is called the Critical Health Resource Information System, otherwise known as CRIS, and that system is live now, and there are many sites around Australia that are reporting. One of the unique aspects of that is that it will allow us to see how many patients in real time have COVID-19, are on ventilators, importantly how many beds are available, how many beds are being occupied by patients with COVID and also non-COVID related conditions. And the reason why that's important is because as we move into resuming elective surgery, some patients will require intensive care after after their surgery, and we will be able to see what the impact of that policy change and that relief on the restrictions on elective surgery will be. Also, that system will bring together public and private data reporting systems, which makes it a very unique and novel system. I'd like to acknowledge the Victorian Government's support of this, Ambulance Victoria, and in particular the Australian New Zealand Intensive Care Society. All those groups and others have collaborated extraordinarily quickly to bring that up and running and online. I can take some questions.
There are reports emerging overseas that patients who have died from the coronavirus have died because of blood clotting. Is that something that's been reported here in Australia, and is that something that health authorities in Australia are looking into?
I think as we learn more and more about coronavirus disease, it's critical that we take these reports on board and use them to the best of our clinicians' ability to inform the treatment of patients in Australia. I'm not aware of that being. Clots in the legs going to the lungs are a known complication of people being unwell with sepsis and being in intensive care for a long period of time. So whether it's specifically due to the coronavirus disease or just because of how unwell people get with it, I suspect we will get more of that information as time goes on.
So I don't suppose you can tell us how many people who've died from coronavirus in Australia died because of respiratory problems versus blood clotting?
So we do have data collection systems for intensive care, as I've just mentioned, but there are also underpinning that several centres, a smaller number, but contribute to overall intensive care research and the reasons why tragically people have died. So that is not information that's obtained in real time, as you can understand. It's different. It's not operational. It's research based, but that sort of information, as and when it is researched and analysed, would be presented by the researchers. I might just take another quick question.
Considering how low new cases are at the moment, how close are we to actually eradicating COVID-19? And is that now the aim rather than just suppression, actual eradication?
Well, the aim, as we've said, is suppression. The reality is that we are doing an extraordinary job. We, as the Australian community, is doing an amazing job in that suppression strategy, to the extent that, as you all know, there are some states that have reported 0 new cases for several days now. So eradication, which basically means that in a geographical area there are no reported cases, or you've effectively eliminated coronavirus from a geographic area, could be an outcome of an excellent suppression strategy. The problem is that we just have to acknowledge the non-immune state of our population and the possibility, as we have seen in northwest Tasmania, of how rapidly coronavirus can spread. And that might be in a healthcare facility, or it might be within another part of the community where people are closely housed together. We have to be particularly attentive to our Indigenous communities in Australia. And so for all those reasons, I think we are on a strategy of suppression. A magnificent outcome would be geographic eradication in certain parts of Australia.
Is there a threshold at which point a suppression strategy becomes an eradication strategy? Is there kind of a levelling up? Or what I'm taking from your question is that we'll always be on the suppression level, especially because of our non-immune communities like remote communities?
I suppose the best way to answer your question is, when does a suppression strategy become an eradication strategy? And that would be when the disease is eradicated in a geographic area. Claire.
Dr. Kirsten, your colleague Professor Brendan Murphy this morning told a Senate inquiry that small gatherings are being considered among some of the measures that might have restrictions eased in 3 weeks' time, but that large gatherings very much were not. Are we to take that to mean things like weddings and other major events are definitely a long way off for Australia?
Well, we've seen what happens when large numbers of adults gather together. There have been a number of major clusters that we're all aware of. Some of those have been related to weddings. And so the way to take things slowly is to increase numbers slowly And so that is exactly what Professor Murphy said this morning, and you can infer from that that larger gatherings are a longer way off. And that would include having crowds at sporting matches, for example, as well as weddings. But the number of people that we could have at events is something that would be considered, quite rightly, in the first tranche of restrictions.
And he also flagged that community sport was an area that had particular benefit health-wise, mental health, to restarting as soon as possible. Would the AHPPC be looking at giving very prescriptive instructions to sporting organisations of how to socially distance? How will they be assisted to apply those measures?
Well, if we did take community sport as an example, then we would absolutely need to provide, I suspect, more detailed guidance. I think the guidance that we've provided at the moment is very clear in terms of social distancing and individual cough hygiene, etc., that Australians know so well, and it is working. But similar to the advice that we've put out on schools, where there is a specific demand or need for advice, then the AHPPC is prepared to provide that advice in some degree of detail.
On the tracing app, the Prime Minister says he wants 40% of the Australian population to download that app for it to be successful. Is that the sort of take-up rate that you would like to see? And if that doesn't happen, are health authorities looking at other methods of expanding contact tracing if the app isn't successful?
Well, I think we just need to walk back to the purpose of the app and consider also what we have at the moment, which is an excellent and robust contact tracing mechanism that's done manually. But you've got to remember that not everybody's memory is perfect for who they've been in contact with for the past 14 days. So the app actually assists those disease detectives in determining who was at risk by effectively providing a memory aid so that no one is missed, so to speak. Now, we also remember that is data that is locally controlled on someone's mobile phone and is only released. So there's two levels of consent here. Firstly, someone has to download the app to participate, and secondly, if you are called by a public health authority to say you have COVID-19, you then have to release that local data to the state jurisdiction that's responsible for you. The Commonwealth will not be looking at that data at all. It'll be for state public health authorities. So in answer to your question about 40%, the more the better. The more the better. And I think that as we are able to explain to Australians the narrow scope of this, the very singular scope, and reassure them that every time someone comes to us and asks us to put an ad in onto that app, the answer is no. And the Attorney-General, I think, was very clear this morning when he said that the police, for example, would have no access to the data of this. And there have been requests. There have been requests to have added capability to the app, and the answer has been absolutely consistent. This is for the disease detectives only.
And is there a timeline or a date that you would like to see that 40% target or potentially more achieved?
I think we should see what happens with the rollout. But I have to say, I am confident that just as Australians have adapted so well to COVID-19, this has been an astonishing behavioural change in a short period of time. I think they will also see the value of having this app as well.
What would be the benefits of the World Health Organization having similar powers to weapon inspectors and being able to basically go into a country uninvited, and how realistic is that actually happening?
Well, you know, the World Health Organization has a really important role to play and in assisting governments around the world in managing disease outbreaks. How that can be improved upon as a result of this particular pandemic is, as you know, going to be the subject of a lot of lessons learned, potentially inquiries, as our Prime Minister has suggested. So I think we don't want to preempt what the results of those would be, except to say that we acknowledge that the World Health Organization has a really important role to play, and we should consider whether its current structures and processes and rules are effective enough to pursue that role.
The Home Affairs Minister today said that the Director General of the World Health Organization should resign. Do you make of that?
I would make of that there's a whole range of views in the community at the moment, that it reflects the deep concern that everybody has about this pandemic and the need to do as well as we can next time.
One of the problems Australia has had in terms of its own data on COVID is that it's a lot of overseas cases. There hasn't been enough in the community to really get a sense of how the virus spreads. Are we getting to a point yet where we can draw sound scientific conclusions from the cases we've had, or is that base number still too small?
We're at the point where we can draw sound scientific conclusions about that. My understanding is that we will be able to share those at some point in the not too distant future. I'm afraid I don't know the exact date, but what I can tell you is that the basic reproductive number, the R effective, is below 1 in every single jurisdiction at the moment, except for Tasmania, obviously, because of the outbreak in North West Regional. And because of the amount of time that's been the case, we can be confident with that result.
Just one last question.
Thank you.
What's your response to reports that billionaire Kerry Stokes was given an exemption from quarantine rules when he flew into Perth from Aspen, and is that appropriate?
I'm afraid I'm not aware of exactly what happened in that scenario, so I'm not able to comment on it. I'll take one more question if there is one.
Actually,
I've exhausted you again. Okay, thank you very much.
That was Deputy Chief Medical Officer Nick Coatsworth announcing 12 new coronavirus cases in the past 24 hours. 48 patients are in intensive care units and 30 of those are on ventilators. Overall, Australia's cases total 6,661. Nick Coatsworth said that the death toll stood at 75, but ABC News is now aware the operator of the Anglicare-run Newmarch aged care home in Sydney is reporting the death of a fourth resident, taking the national death toll to 76. A 79-year-old woman with multiple serious health issues who had tested positive to COVID-19 died this morning. Meanwhile, the number of tests now carried out in Australia stands at 458,000. The Deputy CMO just said that the governments around Australia, state and territory and federal, are moving slowly and cautiously over the next month towards resuming elective surgery. A big part of being able to do that, Nick Coatsworth says, is the launch of a new real-time monitor for intensive care beds in public and private hospitals around the country. Now, turning to some other news, unusually at this time of year, war medals are being polished, uniforms pressed and the grounds of local cenotaphs tidied in preparation for Anzac Day parades. This year, Anzac Day gatherings have been cancelled across most of the country because of coronavirus restrictions. The decision shocked one veteran from the New South Wales North Coast, but his community is determined to make sure he doesn't miss out.
Anzac Day 2020 was shaping up as a special one for Henry Corky Cordwell. The World War II veteran recently turned 100. But the COVID-19 pandemic means Anzac Day gatherings are cancelled, including the one in Grafton near Corky's home.
There you go. It's very important. I've been going to, ever since the war finished, I've been going to Anzac Day ceremonies.
Get your hat.
It means a lot. He looks forward to Anzac Day every year, almost more than anything else. So he was fairly gutted when Anzac Day wasn't going to happen this year.
His daughter Suzanne shared Corky's disappointment in a post on Facebook.
And within 2 days I had 2,500 replies. So since then Dad's received many cards from people all over Australia thanking him for his service, stating how gutted they all are on behalf of Dad and what could they do.
One of those who responded was Phil Heesh, who owns a World War II Jeep.
Well, a mate of mine in Wollongong rang me and said that there was a very disappointed old digger in Grafton that wanted to ride in a Jeep because Anzac Day was cancelled. Turns out that it's the same guy, Corky, that I take every year in our parade in Grafton.
Phil offered to give Corky his own early socially distanced Anzac parade in the streets of Grafton. Corky enlisted in 1941 when he was 21. An auto electrician by trade, he was assigned to an ordnance workshop in Egypt.
We're working about 18 hours a day on ambulances, and some of the tanks have been hit
In 75 years, Corky has never missed an Anzac Day. And while this private parade is early, he does get his moment at the cenotaph.
When you go out the cenotaph, I lay a wreath for my brothers and it gets you a bit, lest we forget.
He did, I think, morph into Anzac mode. I think it was very special. I think he had a wonderful day, wonderful day.
And a memorable one too. Catherine Marciniak, ABC News, Grafton.
Despite being stuck inside, teachers and parents have been thinking outside the box when it comes to homeschooling. As Brittany Klein reports, the challenge is keeping kids educated and entertained.
Good morning, everybody. Start to a week that's very different to others, so I just wanted to send a video this morning.
Roll call this week looks a little different, as does the way teachers are communicating with their students.
If you have any questions or anything, please just send me a message. I'm going to be available all day.
Okay, good morning, Milterra.
This Queensland high school has to cater for 270 students who speak 50 different languages. Showing them the task is just as important as an explanation. Near Roma, getting access to online materials can be tricky.
It's here!
That's why the teachers at Beaumont East State School are flying homework in by drone.
Bye, drone! Thank you!
It's not just accessibility. The art of making education entertaining isn't easy.
What we do is we all get a bingo card and it's got colours and shapes on it.
But getting creative is recommended by the experts during these uncertain times.
So we need to, as teachers, find ways to encourage children to learn without putting the pressure of instruction on their mums and dads.
While it's not up to parents, some, like Phil Manning, are taking teaching in their stride.
What has we got here? What's this called?
Mermaids, because I always wanted to be one.
He turned his daughter's art class into an at-home exhibition.
If we're trying to make it fun, why not try mixing it up in terms of the locations around your home where they're going to do some learning?
Teachers like this assistant principal can sympathise.
Oh, homeschooling, it's really hard. Kids do nothing but complain.
Mr Godkin wrote this song for parents with the things they're unlikely to say during lockdown.
My kids are well behaved, I have no need for wine.
Brittany Klein, ABC News.
Lawyers for the man accused of carrying out a deadly shooting in Darwin last year say he'll argue the defence of mental impairment when the matter reaches trial. Here's court reporter Melissa McKay in Darwin.
Benjamin Glenn Hoffman is facing 14 charges in the Northern Territory Supreme Court, including 4 of murder after an alleged shooting rampage across Darwin's CBD last June. During a pre-trial mention in the Supreme Court this morning, Mr Hoffman's defence lawyer indicated he would run the defence of mental impairment when the matter reaches trial. In previous court mentions, Mr Hoffman's legal team have indicated he intends to plead not guilty to the charges. Today, the court also heard Mr Hoffman has been approved for legal aid funding. Questions were raised in February about whether he would have to represent himself when his legal team withdrew from the case. But today, barrister John Tippett, who's working alongside lawyers from the Legal Aid Commission, did indicate in court that additional special funding might be required given how long the trial is expected to run. The court heard a trial could run for up to 12 weeks, either at the end of this year or beginning of 2021, with the prosecution calling on the evidence of around 480 witnesses. Crown Prosecutor Tammy Greeley today told the court the length of the trial would depend on how much evidence would need to be called in relation to the issue of mental impairment in terms of calling psychiatrists and psychologists to give evidence. Mr Hoffman will return to court in July this year.
We're going to show you some live images now of the Ruby Princess, where she's currently docked at Port Kembla, but we understand that won't be for much longer. We believe the tugs are approaching this vessel and understand that the pilot is on board preparing to steer the Ruby Princess out of harbour. This, of course, has been a long-awaited departure for authorities. The ship's disembarkation at Circular Quay back in March sparked a blame game between authorities because passengers with COVID-19 were allowed to disembark. We now know that about 1 in 10 coronavirus cases throughout Australia has been linked to that ship. It's responsible for more than 600 infections in Australia, 21 deaths, and the ABC has been able to trace at least 36 international cases of coronavirus to the Ruby Princess. It is now the subject of 2 separate inquiries as well. So tugs approaching that vessel at the moment. Our reporter near the Ruby Princess, Mark Reddy, told us a short time ago that it is expected to leave at around 4 o'clock or so. We will keep you updated on its progress. 3 teenage boys accused of murdering a Canberra man they allegedly met through the Grindr dating app have had their cases adjourned in court. Adrienne Reardon reports from Batemans Bay.
The 3 teenagers appeared separately in the Batemans Bay Children's Court today by audiovisual link. They are accused of murdering Canberra auctioneer and father Peter Keeley, who they allegedly met on the South Coast through the dating app Grindr. The body of the 56-year-old was found in bushland at Browlee, south of Batemans Bay, on the 2nd of February. Showing little emotion while appearing via video link, one of the boys called out to his father saying, "I love you, Dad. Take care and stay safe." The prosecutor requested the cases of the 3 accused be adjourned for 8 weeks so police can continue to gather evidence. It was also requested that the 3 teenagers each undergo a forensic procedure, which includes a spit sample, photographs and fingerprints. Magistrate Doug Dick ordered the brief to be served by the 11th of June, with the 3 teenagers due to reappear in the Batemans Bay Children's Court 1 week later on the 18th.
To the day's finance news now with David Chow. And David, there's been a rebound in the oil price. What happened?
Well, it's quite incredible, Kirsten. So there are a few things driving the oil price, and one of them was US President Donald Trump and one of his latest tweets in which he threatened Iran, basically. So what Trump wrote was, "I've instructed the US Navy to shoot down and destroy any and all Iranian gunboats if they harass our ships at sea." So any hint of potential Middle Eastern tensions raises supply issues and tends to drag up oil prices historically. But it seems to relate to an incident which happened last week in which Iranian ships came too close to military vessels from America in international waters. So why he raised it now has a lot of people scratching their heads. But the other main thing driving oil prices was the fact that it got hammered earlier this week, and I guess it could only go up, some would argue, though some would also argue has plenty of room to fall further. So West Texas crude fell earlier this week below $0 for the first time. In fact, it got as low as minus $40 US. So you had to pay people to get rid of the oil because of the massive oversupply in America amid the demand destruction, since hardly anyone's flying, hardly anyone's driving amid these coronavirus business lockdowns and social distancing. So just some context, oil prices have fallen by something like 65% since the year started. So it's one of those volatile assets this year compared to everything else. And basically the US has no place to store it, but there was a rebound since I guess there are some optimists betting that it will go up in the longer term.
Okay. And how is the share market looking this afternoon?
Oh, it's very volatile, Kirsten. So it did start off on a very strong note, up 1%, but after about 1 p.m. it fell into negative territory and looked like it was going to go back up again, but that's not the case. So it looks like the Aussie market is going to finish the day lower in the final hour of trade. So when we take a closer look at the figures, 6 out of every 10 stocks are in the red, with the ASX 200 down more than 20 points. So that's a loss of about 0.5%. So the only 2 sectors which are trading higher are energy and materials. And when we take a look at the top and the bottom movers, we see some big names. So shares in mining company Lynas Corporation have surged 17% after it was awarded a contract by the US Defense Department to develop a rare earths separation facility. Higher oil and gas prices and higher gold prices have boosted Santos and Regis Resources, whereas banks are dragging down the market, with Commonwealth Bank down more than 1%. And healthcare is the worst performing sector, weighed down by the biotech giant CSL. And like many companies struggling with cash flow due to the coronavirus, Ramsay Health Care had to issue new shares to raise $1.2 billion. But that also diluted the value of its shares by quite a bit. Now, it's a mixed picture in Asian markets. Well, actually, they've improved quite a bit. So New Zealand has given up most of its gains, though. It's up by just 0.4%. Hong Kong is up by 0.25%. Japan's Nikkei has jumped by almost 1%, while Shanghai is up slightly, practically flat. And taking a look back at US markets, it was a strong night on Wall Street, which was helped by a recovery in oil prices and the US Senate signing off on another bill for $500 billion worth of stimulus to help businesses get over the coronavirus. And the Dow Jones jumped 2% or 457 points, but it did lose 1,200 points in the previous 2 days. Now, gold is steady at $1,713 an ounce after a big bounce overnight, and oil prices staged a spectacular rebound off a very low base. So Brent crude has surged 9% above $22 a barrel, and the June contract for West Texas crude has risen above $15 a barrel, which is a big improvement considering the May contract for US oil plunged to minus $40 earlier this week. And in currencies, the Australian dollar has lifted a bit. It's buying a bit under 63.3 US cents. And that's the latest in finance news, Kirsten.
Thanks, David. There is increasing concern about the plight of the tourist industry in northern Australia because of COVID-19 travel bans. Top-end businesses would normally be preparing for the tourist rush over winter, but fear they'll have no income for up to 18 months.
Rebecca Penniger knows many people are struggling right now, but that doesn't make the financial stress her family's under easier to bear.
It's a very tricky situation, I think, because we all really love what we do.
She and husband Miles have run their Broome hovercraft business for 9 years. They were just days away from launching their 2020 tourist season when coronavirus hit. A new tourist boat bought just 3 months ago is now gathering dust.
Everything we have is tied up in this. If we don't operate again, we've got to start from scratch, so.
While their income has disappeared, costs such as bank repayments and insurance have not.
When you're mapping out the future and looking at those cash flow projections, they are quite overwhelming.
Tourism operators here in the north get very little income over the summer because it's the wet season. They make most of their income from April to September. But right now, there's barely a tourist in sight.
There's a real risk that there'll be a lot of regional businesses that won't recover, which is awful to say, but that is actually the truth of the real economic impact.
Industry leaders are pushing for a government assistance package tailored to the northern tourism sector.
The feedback I'm getting from operators is they're frustrated, they're falling through the gaps for some of the stimulus packages. And the problem is no one knows the end date to this, so there's just a lot more pain for these operators than others.
In a statement, WA Tourism Minister Paul Papalia says a support team has been created to help tourism operators access assistance, such as electricity grants and the waiving of licence fees and payroll tax. Erin Park, ABC News, Broome.
Now for the day's sports news, Jared Coote joins me again. Jared, the NRL has been given the green light to return to action and the New Zealand Warriors have been approved for play too.
Yeah, that's right. So good news for the Warriors. It looks like they are going to be approved by the government to come over into Australia to play. May 28, the restart date given by the NRL, but training will begin on May 4. Now, the Warriors and the NRL were hopeful that 2-week isolation period that everyone has to go through coming into the country could be waived for the Warriors so they could start training at the same time as everyone else. Peter Dutton has said today that that is unlikely. They'll have to sit out that 2-week isolation period. So training may then be pushed back for all the teams, not just the Warriors, and then we might see the competition restart a little later than the May 28 date we have at the moment. We'll have to wait and see, though, how that all plays out. It's not locked in yet. The competition structure is yet to be determined. Once again, today, the NRL's meeting with their broadcast partners, but we believe it will be a 20-round competition. So they've already played the 2 rounds, 18 to go, then finals after that and State of Origin as well. So it'll go late into the year. The teams would have to be in camp in New South Wales. So all the teams from Queensland and around the country will head to Sydney to go into a camp. There's a list of biosecurity measures that need to be followed by the clubs. There'll be strict penalties if they don't follow those as a result, but the clubs say they're not fully aware of what those exact protocols are at the moment, so tough to make sure they've locked those in when they're meant to be training in just over 2 weeks' time. So we'll have to wait and see how that all plays out. And Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk has also spoken today saying she is open to the NRL being played in the state, but she just needs some clear messaging coming from the NRL about exactly how they plan to do it. She says she hasn't heard much from the NRL, a bit of a communication breakdown. So once that happens, she'll assess it with her medical team, and hopefully then for fans of the NRL in Queensland, they can get some games up there, even though they won't be able to go to the game anyway.
Now, not all codes, though, are planning for a return so early. The A-League sitting it out for a while longer.
Yeah, so they released a statement today saying they're pushing back when they will return with some football action. The A-League, very different to the AFL and the NRL in that they only had 5 rounds left to play and then a final series to go from there. The FFA, so there's little chance of returning before June. They'll meet again next month to find a final date for that. And just like the NRL, they need to let their players go back to training, have what they'll call something of a mini pre-season. Bit strange when there's only 5 rounds left to go before they can get into training. There's some criteria that needs to be met. They need state travel restrictions to be lifted. The government needs to permit some larger gatherings. There's some health and safety thresholds as well for the A-League, but they'll be hoping to get going as soon as possible to wrap up that season, given it was so close to an end and they were trying to go on, and we know they played longer than the other codes, but in the end they just had to call it quits for now. But yeah, further delay for them, which I'm sure the fans won't be liking when they're hearing the other news, the complete opposite coming from the NRL, that they're looking to get back underway, and I'm sure the AFL fans feel exactly the same, although CEO Gil McLachlan did say earlier today they're looking at trying to finalise some dates for a return to play as well.
OK. Now, in tennis, Roger Federer is calling for a big change to the governance of the sport.
Yeah, that's right. Well, he says he wants the men's and women's governing bodies to combine and be playing together. So the ATP and the WTA currently are separate entities. He went on Twitter to say that he thinks that it all should be changed for now. He says that it should have already happened and that the ATP has responded to that already. They say it's possible to work together in good spirit and unity, so there is a possible chance there of the two linking up together. He says it's just confusing, really. They've got different tournament structures, they've got different ranking structures between the men's and the women's, although they're often playing at the very same location. Rafael Nadal has backed Federer, agreeing with him. Billie Jean King, a tennis legend who helped found the WTA, says that was her goal for one governing body. But Nick Kyrgios, the Aussie, he's disagreed with it, so probably the only tennis player so far.
OK, thanks, Jared.
Thank you.
We're taking you live to Adelaide now, where the South Australian Premier Stephen Marshall is speaking.
For providing the letter to parents and also to teachers, 2 separate pieces of advice, and the advice is very strong, reassuring message that schools are safe and that schools will be open in term 2, and we would like to see your children at school for term 2 and beyond. The second key point from today was that the Education Minister has been out and announced an additional $32 million worth of spending. This will immediately go into a range of maintenance work for almost 500 schools and preschools in South Australia. This is going to be great for schools, but it's also going to be very important for creating local jobs in our state. And so we're very pleased to get on with that important work as quickly as possible. And thirdly, I'm absolutely delighted that we will now be offering a chemo at home service for public patients. And in fact, 29 public patients have already signed up to chemo at home. This is another way that we're going to be able to reduce the risk of people with fragile health from going into hospitals during this COVID-19 crisis. I think it is going to be something that we're going to be able to potentially offer on an ongoing basis, and that will be a great improvement to people who are living with cancer. And now, without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Nicola Spurrier to provide the daily update.
Thank you. So another good day for us in South Australia, no new cases reported. So we've now got 438 cases, no increase from yesterday. And we've also got an increase though on people recovered. So 90% of people who have had COVID-19 in our state have now recovered, which is 394 people. We have 40 active cases still. Now, the other thing that we've changed on our daily update is the number of cases without a known epidemiological link, and it's a little bit complicated, so I'll just walk you through it. So we previously had 4 people or 4 cases, and we had some cases under investigation. And we'd had those cases under investigation for quite a period of time because my team have been trying to work out how they could be linked to other known cases in the state. And we've decided to up that the number of cases from 4 to 7, so taking 3 more of those cases under investigation and putting them in the category of no known link or epidemiological link. However, I just wanted to explain and give an example of one of those. So one might be where you've got a person who is known as a case and they have a relative, so they've been in close contact with that relative. And then the relative, we also know, has been in close contact with another case, but the relative is not a case, so there's not a direct link. Now, the person in the middle, that relative, has had no symptoms, so was never tested. Of course, if we were looking at it again now, we could say, oh, we should have tested that person. But at the time, because they had no symptoms, they didn't have a test done. So we haven't been able to make a direct link. So some of those cases that we're going to call no known epidemiological link or an example of community transmission may in fact have a tenuous link, but we're just going to have to call it that for the time being. However, just also to let you know, we do have a way of possibly being able to link some of those cases using what's called genomic testing. And that is going back to that initial sample of the virus that was taken. And if there's enough of the sample left, we can have it tested for do genomic testing. And that's looking at the genetics of that specific virus. And sometimes we will then be able to make the link by being able to see whether the other possibly related case is linked genomically. So I know it's a little bit complicated, but I just wanted to reassure the public that I'm no more concerned today as I was yesterday, but it just means that we've been working behind the scenes to try and tidy up some of those cases under investigation. In terms of our hospitalisations, that's stable from yesterday. 4 people remain in our hospital. This includes, unfortunately, 2 people who are still in intensive care, and unfortunately both we consider to be in a critical condition, and that's a 68-year-old man and a 75-year-old man. In terms of our testing update, we had 1,675 tests done yesterday, and that's more than 48,000.
And that's where we'll leave that update from South Australia. Thanks for your company here on ABC News. I'm Kirsten Aiken. I'm going to leave you with some images from Port Kembla, where the Ruby Princess is being readied for her long-awaited departure this afternoon for the Philippines. Coming up next on the ABC News Channel, Afternoon Briefing.
Tonight, there's a new generation of leadership emerging. Silly Scales, welcome to 1+1. Barry sits down to talk art, politics and empowerment.
Growing up and seeing women lead, they can do it, I can do it too.
With the formidable Sally Scales.
I'm here for a reason and you're going to hear me.
1+1, tonight 9:20 ABC and iView.
Tomorrow on News Breakfast, we'll meet some of the driveway buglers who are preparing to perform the last post in towns and cities across the country on Anzac Day.
And we'll look at the new friendships developing between seniors and kids in this time of isolation. Don't miss it.
It feels good. The best entertainment is yours to stream free on iView.
Come on in, people.
Collections of the biggest titles.
With complete series of dramas,
comedies,
docos,
true crime,
and lifestyle programs. Cheers!
See you then, Australia.
Like I knew it would. iView, yours to stream.
Coronavirus is changing the way we live, work and communicate. Changes can be hard. So it's vital to take care of ourselves and others. Prioritising your mental health is important. To help, there are some things you can do, like eating well, keeping active, talking with family, friends and neighbours via phone or video calls, and making a new daily routine. Together, we can help stop the spread and stay healthy. Visit australia.gov.au to learn more. Authorised by the Australian Government, Canberra.
Whenever you want, wherever you are, know the story with ABC News, the most trusted news source. Get breaking updates with live notifications and access the latest news and information.
Give yourself the best chance you can.
Go to news.abc.net.au or download the ABC News app.
We are one, but we are many, and from all the lands where we come, we share a dream and sing with one voice. I am, you are, we are Australian, we are one. But we are many, and from all the lands where we come, we share a dream and sing with one voice. I am, you are, we are Australian. We are Australian.
Hello and welcome to Afternoon Briefing here on ABC News. I'm Patricia Carvelis. Coming up this hour, I'll be speaking to the Education Minister Dan Tehan, plus my political panel later in the program, and David Spears from Insiders on what's making news in Canberra. But first, here are the day's top stories. Australia records its 76th COVID-19 death. Victoria Police named the 4 officers killed in the Eastern Freeway crash in Melbourne. The virus-ravaged Ruby Princess prepares to set